Now, can we upgrade Tom to a panelist?
Yep, just to see where he comes up.
So Tom, promote to panelist. Okay, I've done that.
You've done, okay. And Mark is here. Mark is there as well.
Yes, we see Mark ceiling.
Good.
Yes, you see my ceiling, but I'm not ready yet. So
Okay.
doing that by phone. I hope it works out at the end, but we'll see. My computer just crashed, so that was not very helpful.
Okay. All right, guys. Shall we wait for a couple of more minutes, or?
Yeah.
You need to start accepting.
Yeah, 3 more minutes. Yeah. Okay. We're at least all here.
Do you have Tom? I don't see Tom.
Yeah, no, I don't see Tom there.
Yes. I see him
there,
as a
but,
panelist, but his video is off.
On the microphone.
Tom, can you say something?
Milena, what you need to select to see also us, if you go
Yeah.
at top of your window, you have a green button, you are viewing blah, 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 and then you have view options, a drop down.
Where do you?
At top of your screen, middle top of your screen. You have a view option button.
Yeah, but I can't see it when I'm in a presentation mode.
But exit from the presentation mode. Just stop sharing. Now go to the. Then
I can see
it is appearing. No, you need to be in a presentation mode. Go again in presentation mode.
Share.
Okay. And now you should have this at top of the middle of the screen. You have view options.
Right. No. There is mute, stop video, participants, Q&A, polls, new share, annotate.
And in that view option, you need to select side by side, and then you see cameras and the presentation.
I've clicked, but I don't know where it shows. Yeah, it's going to be fine until I get into the presentation and then problems. Yeah.
Look, I'll do a picture. Where is the button? And I'll send it in, photo. And I'll send it in WhatsApp.
Okay, thank you. What you see, I don't have that option at all. Meeting controls. Yeah. All righty, shall we then start for today?
Yeah, I think we need to start, otherwise it's already late.
All right.
So just open it.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on what can the REA community, Resilience Engineering Association community, learn from air traffic management in dealing with COVID-19. My name is Milena, and together with my dear colleague Anthony, I'll be moderating the webinar. Before we start, we would just like to ask you to keep your cameras and video off, and we would like to inform you that this video is being recorded, and in a couple of days it is going to be posted onto the REA website. We would also like to invite you to use the Q&A functionality to ask as many questions as you wish. We have planned 2 Q&A sessions during the webinar in which we are going to try to answer some of them. But other questions we'll try to answer in writing later on. So I'm sure you all are facing some sort of fatigue related to all sorts of webinars we're having nowadays, but I would like to assure you that this webinar is very much worth your time. And yeah, those of you working in the ATM, I'm pretty sure that you've heard the notion of resilience quite a lot since COVID started. And sometimes resilience was used quite in a negative context, and to say that the ATM system was not resilient enough, and that in the future ATM system we need to develop this resilience capability to optimize resilient performance of our system. And in other instances, we heard the word resilience in a sort of a positive connotation, saying that we as an industry dealt quite well with COVID-19. And yeah, so that makes you wonder, was ATM performance resilient or not? How should we interpret this? And that's why we have invited our speakers today to answer these questions and many more. We are also asked them to share with us some of the research questions that would be of interest for them as an industry. The research questions we could share with the research community and try to ask help to address in the future. And that's why we have planned a follow-up webinar on 11th of February 2021, where we will present these questions to groups of researchers and ask them to come up at least with directions on how this topic should.
Maybe Anthony, you can take it over because I think Milena has got.
Yep. Okay. So we put together the panel and we posed some questions, especially about whether or not resilience engineering, the perspective it has of COVID-19, the way ATM has responded, the challenges it was given. So what does it tell us about how ATM was prepared, how it was able to adapt and develop ways of working in the last 9 months? And hence this panel has been put together. I think we probably lost Milena. So there are lots of questions that we could have about this, but having these people here to talk to us gives us 4 different perspectives. And these different perspectives we hope will open up this particular question about resilience engineering, the nature of ATM, in the nature of a surprise. And is this surprise a fundamental surprise? Is this surprise a situational surprise? And that's really part of the thrust of what we want to discuss today. So we're going to go now straight away into the panel session. Individual panel members will be talking. So we have 4 people to talk to us today. Rowan Powell from EASA. Rowan was Tony Licu from EUROCONTRol. Marc Baumgartner.
Pleasure to be there.
Marc Baumgartner from SkyGuide and representing IFATCA. And Tom Laursen from Copenhagen, controller, and representing DATCA. And the order for this particular sequence will be Tony Licu first, followed by Marc, then Rowan, and then followed by Tom. We'll have time for some questions at the end. Please use the Q&A part of the Zoom component for questions, and we'll work through that. and there's some chat if you want to use that. So to begin with then, please, Tony, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Anthony. First of all, thanks to you, to Milena, to Yvonne, to the REA for inviting me and in such a distinguished panel. And it's a very challenging webinar. I've been immersed in resilience engineering this autumn because I'm in a project with DFS and Navier where we invited David Woods and Eric Holnager. So I think I resonate very much with that. But to stick with the opening part where we look at the ATM industry or take on the management of the resilience, I would like to say that probably, and related to my experience in Eurocontrol, I would say, at least one of the four, elements of the resilience reaction, I think the ATM, the first one, that even, any company needs to react in any crisis. I think ATM industry overall the reaction part was great. And to stick with the positive part, I think what came out of this crisis, probably the worst in the history that we had, worse than 9/11 for sure, is that the health of employees, the well-being. We talk a lot about well-being these days. It has been put in front of the radar of senior and middle management. I think the second positive thing was that we were able to scale down. I think another buzzword these days that probably we should demystify it's scalability. So we scaled down quite fast, and we were able to build up progressively in summer. So we went down up to 10% of the traffic of the last year, and we came back up to the 50%. Also now we are slipping down, day after day. We are down at about 34% of the traffic of the last year. So this up and down scalability, I think the organizations they coped very, very well. I think so there is I would say some elements of monitoring which works well. I think overall what probably we don't do all as society, I think, is the way how we reacted as states managing the crisis. Because I think there are three phases, I think, in which you may deal with a pandemic. The first one, is the realization that there is a pandemic there. The second one, you start blaming each other because you have the first cases appearing in your countries, and then you start blaming the neighbors, the people who are visiting you, and then in the third phase you start probably managing and control it. And all this difference, I think there is a complete cacophony on how we reacted, and that shows that probably not all the traits of resilience are there. But I'll say in practice, I would say as organizations, Eurocontrol has been resilient for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that we have a very large cognitive diversity, which in fact represents that we have people with very mixed backgrounds who are looking in different timelines. So some, they looked at the immediate reactions of the crisis, some of preparing the return to the operation, and you still have few others which are looking for the long-term future. And that is a trait of a resilience organization. Another one is the fact that we have brought back, I would say, back into the business, the middle management, which I think in a crisis is quite important. Usually everyone is looking at the CEOs and the leaderships and the director general, and I think our DG Iman has did a good job in bringing together the general directors of civil aviation, airlines, but in running the day-to-day, the network manager and the operations, we got a lot of support from the middle management, especially for the ops room, for the operations manager, for the supervisors, and so forth. Because in times of crisis, it's quite easy to cut this layer. I think what I've seen, and I will stop here to allow the others to make their introduction. I think one of the things that this pandemic has brought in, and I put a slide onto that, is that we have increased the distance, I think, from the front end to the blunt end. And I think there is a bigger distance now between the top of the companies and what happens on the shop floor. And I think anyway, in this messy world, in this preparatory slide that probably later on we can put it back, anyway, what we think is imagining, what is prescribed is not as happening and what is disclosed. And in this messy world, I think this overlaps between work as imagined, work as done, work as disclosed, and so forth, it's a less overlap into that, and we have a bigger distance between the operations and the management. So this is my first idea and my first take on. I'll be happy to come back when we have further questions.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any slides you want to talk to now we've got the presentation up?
Yeah, I think it's the slide 6.
6. Thanks, Milena.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that was the things that I wanted to talk about, but I think I already made that point.
Okay.
Anyway, even without or with COVID, the complexity aviation system is very big. And I put this slide, which is borrowed from my colleague and friend, Steve Shorrock. So he has this very well representation of the differences of the work as imagined and work as done, but with very other large variations. The work as prescribed is what we have in books, manuals, regulation. Work is imagined is what we think is happening in the flight decks, on the airport, in ops rooms, and so forth. The work as done is what really our operators are doing, and work as disclosed is what they are prepared to disclose to us because of various pressures, tensions, and different other aspects. And anyway, they are never identical, these things, and it's a smaller or bigger. I would say in the resilient organization, the differences between these the different aspects of work, it's small. In less resilient organization, this is big. And the second point, what I wanted to emphasize there, that there is increasing level of abstraction between what is happening at the blunt end, at the management, at society, and what happens in the reality. And I think with the crisis, we have enlarged that gap. So that was the point. Thank you. Back to you, Andre.
All right.
Thank you. Milena.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I had a big problem. My computer crashed, so I had to restart and reconnect again. So I'm really sorry, Tony, you couldn't share your slide initially. So thank you very much for picking it over. Thank you. So
It's
shall we
work as
now?
done.
Sorry.
It's
Resilience in
work as done
practice.
rather than imagine. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so we would like now to move on to Marc. Marc would like to share some insights with us regarding IFATCA. So please, Marc, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Milena. Just can you read me?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. So good afternoon to everybody. I'm talking today on behalf of IFATCA, and everything I'm going to say and refer to, you will find these publications on the IFATCA website. So you have guidance material, you have political messages, but you also have interviews on the various impacts and the various reaction of the air traffic controller community around the world. IFATCA represents, you see that in red, approximately 130, 135 countries around the globe. Milena, if I could ask you to move on to the next slide. What we did as a global organization, we tried quite rapidly to assess what kind of needs our members would have around the globe, and it's of course not the same needs in every place. So there is no single standard answer to this crisis. So maybe if you could move one more, click one more.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I'm going to show you, and I think in the end it will also be published, a so-called mind map, which I have actually elaborated to structure some of the reactions and some of the categories with regard to resilience. One category I will not go through in 5 minutes with this whole mind map, but one of the main categories was health. So in the first instance, it was control healthy, means physical. So what was put in place in order that you can continue to work even with the health risk of contracting COVID. And the other one is now a little bit a long-term element, which is how do you continue to control healthy from a mental point of view, so well-being. And then one of the elements which, and if you can click, I think it will move on as well, yes, continue to control. So a tremendous drop in traffic means also a complete change in roster, a complete change in availabilities, a complete reorganization for certain navigation service providers, from sometimes zero traffic to others having thousands % increase, or I'm exaggerating, but there were actually places where, for example, VFR traffic arrived, which there was never VFR traffic. And so how do you control in situations like this, where suddenly either you have a loss of traffic or you have an increase of traffic you have never experienced before? And then, of course, all what we are hoping now, or what we also experienced a little bit during the summer, the recovery. So how do we prepare to this recovery? Being furloughed as controllers, being on short-time work as controllers, you come rapidly to the elements of not having enough training and things like this. So these were elements we actually also started to talk about. How will the recovery, the restart of complex system go along? And then, of course, what can we learn out of this? So what kind of opportunities, simulator, time off, early retirement, new ways of working, becoming maybe a bit more flexible with regard to scalability, with rosters, elements like this. So these are the main categories which we learned in interviews which we carried out throughout the world, and also with some of the work we did together with other global associations like ICAO, ITF, CANSA, and so on and so forth. That would be my introductory remark. And I think for the topic for the panel, it could be interesting to look into these categories and pick out one or two of the elements which could be used as lessons learned from this crisis. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marc, for your insights. Shall we now move on to Rowan? Rowan, please.
Hi. If we could move on to the slides that I sent you, that would be great. So what I wanted to do was to talk through with you my ideas and experiences about resilience in the system over the past 6 months from a regulatory perspective, which is slightly different because we're then another layer removed from the coalface, from the reality that many of you experienced. And reflecting on it, I think what we've found is that we have a robust aviation system because of high standards that have been developed by some of you listening. In fact, many organisations working together collaboratively with EUROCONTROL and more latterly with the EASA. But that's robustness. Was it a resilient system in 2019 and in 2020? We have standards. The basic regulation has flexibility provisions. Does that give us resilience? Probably not, but we did extensively use the basic regulations flexibility provisions in 2020 to enable us to adapt the system to the crisis. So next slide. Was the aviation system resilient? We saw traffic levels drop drastically despite the fact that the technology existed to safely transport passengers. The know-how had to be developed, understanding of the virus had to be developed and how it spread. And then once we had a protocol in place, confidence really has yet to be gained. And that has not been an easy thing to overcome, it has to be said. And then another point when you look at resilience and regulators is that the structure of Europe is component by component. So we have an aviation agency, a health agency, a railways agency, and so on, which means we're not always well adapted to the unknown unknowns. Whenever a new challenge emerges, it needs to fit either within a component, hopefully, or then be jointly managed. And so if something emerges that has to be jointly managed at a period of crisis, that then really challenges the system, and it hugely increases our workload in point of fact. But nevertheless, I think the ATM system itself adapted to the new reality quite quickly. Next slide. And then I also thought about the regulatory outputs before and during 2020 that have supported us as a system. I think that The ATM industry has management system implementation that's much further ahead than other aviation domains. And that's thanks to multiple efforts. It's thanks to some people actually who are listening in and some people participating today. And it's the only domain that monitors SMS performance via the performance scheme, which does actually mean that you have a certain level of standards that has supported you. And then during the first wave and now, for regulators, changing systems generate the highest workload because we have to monitor and understand the changes, understand what risks are emerging as a result of the changes, and then respond to them. So what we've been doing is publishing generic and ATM specific guidelines and safety information bulletins. And I'd just like to highlight one to you, which is a guideline, if you like, which is the review of aviation safety issues arising from the pandemic. And that is where we surveyed the industry and the member states' competent authorities, or NSAs, to understand what the issues were that they anticipated over the course of the pandemic. And we started this process in April and we published in June. So it really gave us a forward-looking assessment of the risks, and it's proved to be remarkably accurate. So it's worth taking a look. Next slide, please. Then looking at the future, we've been monitoring lots of different elements to understand how the system has been changing. So not just traffic levels, but for example, the rate of application for exemptions. And we know that the rate that exemptions were being applied for was drastically increased in the spring. But the need for these exemptions is reducing at the moment faster than traffic is increasing. So it's one of those unusual benefits of the member states' lockdowns, the slower recovery, but also an indication that we've adapted to the circumstances of the pandemic. So not only as an industry, but as a society, people are allowed to have more mobility than we had in the springtime. And then looking into the future, I think we need to remember that the system in 2021 will not be the same as 2019. That would always have been the case, but the differences will be much more marked. It's a complex system and people and businesses will have gone, behaviours have changed, and the myriad interactions in the system are therefore different, or will therefore be different. And that's all from me for now.
All righty. Thank you very much, Rowan. It is really important for us to have a regulator's perspective in this, very valuable. Thank you very much. And now we have with us Tom Laursen. Would you like to say what are your thoughts about DATCA's view on resilience, please? Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I would try to. I've tried to take a look from a little bit further away than the specifics of what happened from, let's say, February, March or so. So take a little bit a wider perspective. And I think actually that air traffic control is in a bit of a reciprocal situation to other industries, for example, healthcare and other industries who have become under pressure from the COVID-19 crisis. It's actually the other way around for ATC. We were in a situation of disturbance where we were at the edge of our performance boundaries. We had huge delays in 2018, 2019. And then the crisis came, and suddenly we had enough resources, enough time to think. So when we came over the first shock, then we have had enough time to cope with the variability in the system. And I think we're actually not too bad at doing that. And I'm not saying that it is without challenges, but at least we have enough time, and also we have enough money right now to deal with this. So this is two very important components of the system that helps us. And that is probably what I'm gonna focus a little bit of the business part of what we are doing, and what the impact of that long term on the resilience of the ATM system. So yeah. So if we look a little bit in, as I said, in 2019, 2018, we had one of the worst years on record in Europe. We created huge delays. The system was under production pressure. You could argue that it was a disturbance. That was the effects of the economic crisis from 2008 to 2011, 12 or so, where we stopped training controllers. We were under enormous cost-cutting pressure. And then when the traffic picked up in 15, 16, 17, we of course didn't have enough resources to cope with the production pressure we had there. So you could also say that the COVID-19 crisis came at a very convenient time for ATM, so we can regather and then make us ready for the future. But the delay figures are now forgotten, and ANSPs in Europe are sort of under pressure to cut costs. How that will play out, we don't know yet. But historically, we have responded to these kind of crises by stopping training, stopping investment in technology, stopping investment in all kinds of parts of the system, and that has led to the next crisis where we are under production pressure and thereby have all kinds of issues with safety and being able to cope with disturbances. So despite that, I also think that there's been some very positive things to learn from this, and especially that we have entertained or we have discussed for quite an extensive time, states, air navigation service providers, staff, and all parts of the system have discussed and have agreed upon that ATM is infrastructure. And that is quite important, because then we all learned that it is a state it's a state obligation to do this. You cannot get around it, and if you don't invest in it, you are not capable of responding or delivering the service that you're supposed to deliver. Whether this is enough to make sure that we don't get an under finance system after the crisis, I don't know, but it seems to be that the mechanisms we have put in place, the framework, the rules, and the agreements we have all around the world are capable of making sure that the system is still reasonable financed, and also the staff is maintained. Even the technical plans for the future are being maintained at the moment. So, but what I would just focus on a little bit right now is the business decisions that are being made during the COVID crisis, and their impact on the system in the next 10 to 15 years. I think that's where the resilience society has where it can offer some help and responses to how we deal with that, because in all ANSPs around Europe, at least that's where I have the best overview. These discussions are going on right now. Where do we cut costs? Do we cut costs? Do we get money from the state? Are we sure that these things do not, or what is the impact of these decisions over 5, 10, 15 years? And that is sort of where I think resilience can come in and help us research and help us with answers to how to deal with these questions. I think that was my introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Very insightful. Now we would like to move. We only have one question in the Q&A. So, Anthony, would you like to ask it to?
Yes, certainly. This is from Jessica Popescu, and it's a particular question, perhaps geared to Rowan from EASA. And the question reads, although you can see it, how are your industries adapting to better respond to this type of situation, probably the pandemic, and support your partners? Will authorities evolve their current regulations to have dedicated regulations for crisis situation to limit the impact on air traffic? So, Rowan, could you deal with that part of the question, please?
Yes, sure. It's a very interesting question, actually. I think that we now know how to respond to this crisis in terms of how we apply the existing flexibility provisions that we have in the basic regulation to enable, for example, extensions to medicals and licenses. We've been able to adapt training so that it can be done remotely rather than or for certain types of training, at least, it can be done remotely rather than in an office. So we have learned from this crisis. The challenge is to be generally resilient for the next crisis, because it won't be the same crisis. It will be something different. If we think back to volcanic ash, we put in place an awful lot of regulations relating to engines and to the management of airspace, and we reacted to that crisis. What we see at the moment is a situation where I don't think as a regulator we could do more than we're already doing without grabbing a huge regulatory scope at the same time, because we would be managing elements of public health alongside aviation. And in reality, we need more of a framework where we can work with partner agencies and work with member states, I would say, in a pre-prepared framework, if you like, so that we can then implement the measures that we need to more rapidly. And so it's a question of how we develop something that is sufficiently broad that we're not just addressing this crisis, but the next crisis, while at the same time not overreaching, if you like, in the development of the regulations.
Thank you very much indeed, Rowan. There are two more questions in the question book, but we'll come back to them later. So, Dave, thanks very much for those. Haven't forgotten them, and we'll come back to them. Milena, do you want to start the panel session?
Yeah. Yeah, so we would like now to invite our four speakers into a panel discussion. We have thought about some certain themes we would like to share with you, and we would start with this one, which is COVID-19. Was it an expected or unexpected event? So if we look, for instance, World Economic Forum has identified the infectious disease in the top risk in terms of impact in the last 3 years. And the question is, why didn't the ATM industry pick up on it? Or maybe it did. So maybe I would like to start with you, Tony. Can you share your views on this?
Yes, Milena, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that the correct answer is it shouldn't, because pandemics is not a black swan. I think with further experiences, and well, it was SARS, Zika, even Ebola, I would say, and that was 2014. And the issue is that I think the people, one issue that I would argue, and maybe later on what we should look in the future of resilience, is how we can continue to have that reaction that we have during a massive, disturbance, and have that in an operation where we don't have that. So to react, to carry on that learning. I want to make a parallel. For example, when we had Ebola in 2014, in US, they had 9 cases which have arrived in US. And in fact, they had 30 of the US hospitals which were identified that are, capable of dealing with Ebola. And in every hospital, in fact, they realized that at that time that they can isolate only one patient of Ebola. And obviously that should have been a trigger of alarm for the healthcare system of that country. And I think for all the other countries, because there have been papers, analysis, who said that, you know, if there will be a different pandemics where we had much more infections and we have much more individuals affected, there is no way how we can cope with that. But, you know, I think the most difficult feature of resilience, anticipation, together with the learning, because I would argue the organizations and country are very difficult to learn, is the people who learn. And if the people in this system promote that learning, then yes, we will do better in the next you know, unthinkable event. Because I agree with Rowan. You know, we did so many things after volcanic ash, but the next major crisis is not volcanic ash. The next major crisis will probably not be pandemics. But to come back to the question, also to the one that we commented before, I don't think we should have, raised by Francesca, I don't think we should have regulation written for crisis. The regulation should hold the water for any of the cases. And I think it should be enough flexibility. And I think they proved these days that was enough flexibility. And one of the points which I think EASA is making very good right now, and I encourage, you know, the NSPs and the competent authorities to take that flexibility, is today, apparently, big organizations with a large number of air traffic control in the big centers, they don't make their initial, you know, number of hours in live traffic that they were foreseen in their competency schemes. But I think you can negotiate in the unit competency scheme the elements when you are in the crisis, and there is it's an opening there. Rather they use exemptions than to use the unit competency scheme. So yeah, that would be my view on that. Back
Thank you, Tony. Tony, I would also like to ask you, what do you think, whether this event brings us to bring into question our existing risk management practices? If we miss these sort of events, did we give them enough attention? Should we re-examine what we do in terms of risk management?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, you know, the credibility of the risk management and the fact that is that credibility of certain risks that they will never happen to us. And I think I got this quotation from David, who says, you know, and he got it from Mike Tyson. So everyone has a plan until they got punched into the mouth. And I think we have, you know, with the NSPs, I look into our library, and we wrote in 2009 guideline for the NSPs on contingency planning and air navigation services. And it's a full annex on pandemics. Was triggered by the SARS events. But when the crisis started, I had the NSPs writing to me, well, what should we do? And I directed them to that annex. I said, we completely forgot about that. Yeah. So when we look at, you know, we look at the risks which are probably too much into our visibility, but those risks which, you know, we don't believe, they will never happen to me. I think this is where this uneasiness that we should have for, you know, any unexpected events, I think that needs to be in the DNA of the safety management. Or having indeed the real resilience engineering flowing through the safety management. Otherwise, I think it's just a paper exercise.
Yes, because all the evidence was there and pointing, but we somehow decided to ignore this. Huh? And maybe I would like to turn now to Marc and his experience in terms of how did NSPs, were they prepared for this event? To which extent? Are there any requirements for this in place? Like, for instance, in Annex 11, there are certain requirements, but other than that, there are no requirements. What do you think, Marc?
Well, I think here it depends really from which part of the globe you look at, because I think in some of the areas of the world, you have already adjustments, adaptation to actually situation. Like, for example, it started with AIDS. How do you work with AIDS? So that was in the very early. Then Tony mentioned Ebola, but we had also with SARS. After SARS, plenty of air navigation service providers started to actually, most probably forced by the health and sanitary organization of their country, of their respective country, to draw up pandemic plans. But they were pandemic plans which were actually geared to fight something like SARS or MERS, where you would be providing air traffic control service to an infected patient or a plane with infected passengers on board. How would you isolate them? How would you protect also in the first moment the workforce? You would not let them go home because they would be infected, and the infectious issues would be much more serious than what we see now currently with COVID. So in the level of maybe Ebola, 30 or 50% of risk, and not just 0.3% of mortality risk and things like this. So these plans were in many places actually around the globe put in place, but maybe shelved or put in an archive. Or the first thing, for example, some of our colleagues mentioned in the interviews we did, is that all the masks and all the disinfection gear you had to throw it away, because that since SARS it was actually put somewhere and forgotten, and actually was not renewed. So these are things I think some of the air navigation service provider did prepare. One thing which I would like to say as well, from a resilience point of view, aviation is a very dynamic environment. So is air navigation service provision when it comes to actually get together. And maybe we're blindfolded because we're internally in our sector and things like this, but the reaction on the first and second indication that something is coming was actually quite impressive. So, for example, 41 states from EUROCONTROL in the European regions who are asking EUROCONTROL to collect the route charges have agreed to defer the payment of the route charges. That also links a little bit to the question which was asked beforehand. What can we do for the others? And so there was a quite pragmatic decision taken to defer the payments, and then quite pragmatic as well. The funds were actually made available through a loan which EUROCONTROL contracted on behalf of the states, and so whoever wanted to be part of it. So I think this, even if it's in the nature and in the impact, it's of abyssal nature. This crisis, we have never seen actually something. We have no experience with that. But the reaction, the fact that the network exists, that the network also were able to work together to come out with rapid answer, but also now with long-term answers. So you have, maybe some of you have seen recent roundtable declaration where the people get together and say, okay, what can we do? Are we ready? Can we move? You see that now for certain countries or airports which start to do rapid testing, also providing vaccination possibilities for those who have vaccines available, and so on and so forth. So agile, I would call it a little bit agile.
Okay. Thank you, Marc. So if we can summarize, basically COVID-19 was predicted, but we just decided to treat it as a black swan event, isn't it the case? Marc?
Black swan events have always a little bit of drama around it. So it is just part of something which we had to cope with. So daily operations had to continue. You had to provide 24 hours air traffic services in different conditions. And I don't think we can qualify it as a black swan event. I would actually agree with Tony. From an economical point of view, yes, it's really an absolute haywalk. But from a purely operational point of view, I don't think it's a black swan event where you suddenly are confronted with things you don't know. The operations went on. They just went down in a different scale.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
There's a couple of questions that I'd like to take now. And Dave Woods has got a question. This is for Marc and Tony, because it builds on the theme we just discussed. The question reads: in the case of the Icelandic volcano, the industry's response was very slow. It was very difficult to gather, integrate information under uncertainty, and coordinate all of the different parties to develop courses of action. Can the panelists, in fact, actually, we'll use all four of you, please. Can the panelists comment on how has the industry improved in its ability to respond to the shock, especially the ability to be highly responsive? So Tony and Marc, if you could go first, and then Rowan and Tom follow, please.
Yeah, thank you for an easy question, David. So, yeah, I think you can see the slow response as well. What's happening now, you know, and actually you wonder if there is any response, and everyone is looking for the vaccine like the panacea of the solution. So rather there could be other, you know, palliative, you know, fast testing and so forth to put back, you know, and restore the confidence in flying. I think what could be different in case of the volcano is that, you know, when it happened, you know, 10 years ago, I think technologically we're in a different era. Today, I think technologically we have new modeling, we can combine the data. And actually my hope is, because a part of human dimension, you know, and decision making and this relationship of risk management, safety and the senior leadership is the technological part that I think this crisis has moved that in a different dimension of the digitalization. And you see, you know, even before the crisis, the buzzwords, if we have to debuzzify something, it's, you know, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so forth. So I've been involved in some research in the volcano as well. And, you know, the fact that, you know, the model that we had at the time of the volcano was a model that was borrowed from the nuclear eruption. But, you know, with the particles, the size matters. And I think you need a different model for that, and I think this has emerged of that. I think this will be the difference. But of course, you know, when you have many players, I think what we have, and I think that was activated, and I think aviation-wise worked well. But I think we need to test our resilience when, you know, the impact of the crisis goes beyond aviation. It's not just internally to aviation, like is this you know, pandemic crisis. In there, you know, the decision is not with the competent authorities. You know, the fact that you can leave or depart from a country or you are quarantined is with the, you know, with medical, with the internal affairs, with the political decision, and so forth. We have an EASA, which is European Aviation Crisis Coordination Cell, that can be activated and can discuss and collect that information. And basically this is what we tried in a collective partnership with the EASA, with the airlines, with the air navigation service provider, with Commission. Every Monday through these digital tools, we meet and discuss and we plan, and the airlines every week, they submit new schedules and so forth. But yeah, I would say the technological support is different than where it was at the time of the volcano.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Shall we now move on with the panel? So I would like to move on to the next question, and that is, what do we mean when we talk about resilience in the ATM context? So, for instance, Rowan mentioned in her presentation that maybe in the regulatory framework, resilience can be understood as standards plus flexibility. So, I was wondering what you think about it. For instance, Tom, what do you think about this?
You have to repeat the question.
So in her presentation, Rowan talked about resilience being kind of standards plus flexibility. So I was wondering how you thought, what you thought about this.
Feel free to disagree, because it's always a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
I mean, when you put up these equations, you always limit what I mean. These words can mean everything and nothing. But what does flexibility mean? But what I would say about that is, at least the standards, the framework, the agreements that we have on international level has played a major role in making sure that the system is has not yet come under extreme pressure. So what we have built up over the 60, 70 years that we have built up the ATM system is actually providing some kind of resilience to a situation like this. So I think that's at least what I learned from this, that although there's pressure from everywhere, we are still capable of maintaining the service, giving the military the service they need, the VFR traffic, the training we have had as controllers, the technology we have introduced, the financial framework that we have introduced on European level has also shown us to work. And of course, flexibility. What does that mean? But if it means something that the people are flexible, that we are capable as an organization to put our resources where they are needed and take them away where they are not needed, and so forth, then yeah, then I think it's a fair equation to put up, but it cannot be the answer. But at least what I think is very important is that the framework has helped a lot, and I don't know if it surprised me, but at least it confirmed something that we probably knew but had forgotten, and it is good that we discussed that again.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And have you noticed that there are lots of references in terms of resilience when people talk about resilience, but they actually mean robustness?
I don't want to go into. I'm not a fan of these 100% definitions of words and all that. And if we start that discussion, I don't think it's useful right now.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Rowan, you wanted to add something?
Well, I think it's a really interesting discussion because we do have the robustness through the standards and we do have flexibility through the provisions. We also have the ability to learn. And I think coming back to one of the questions that we were just talking about, what has changed since volcanic ash, is implementation of management systems, not just within organizations, but also at the regulators. We have state safety programs. We have safety risk management systems that have enabled us to learn what's been happening. And so in that sense, we've been learning and adapting and therefore being much more resilient in light of the crisis. But I think the other point is that the system has continued to provide the service that has been needed. We think about the transport of passengers and the huge reduction in traffic, but for other parts of the industry, if you are a cargo operator, if you are an offshore helicopter operator, or if you are a HEMS operator, those aircraft have still been flying, and the ANSPs have still been providing services to them. And so the system has adapted to the circumstance in which it found itself. The question will be at what cost in the future. And so this is something that we're looking at very carefully as a regulator. The cost in terms of the well-being of the people who have been furloughed, the costs in terms of the well-being of those who are no longer working, or if we think about the financial investments going into the future so that systems are upgraded, will that still happen at the same rate as was planned? And I think that particularly we're very interested in ensuring that that does happen, because otherwise the system degrades.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Rowan. And I would just like to add another kind of difficult discussion about the relationship between resilience and safety, because there are some people who consider them equivalent. So maybe Tony, could you add on to this?
Yes, thank you. And maybe I can put also a provocative thought on the previous discussion, because recently I went back and read some of the writings of the Carl Weiken. Is the guy who gave safety practice and that when people are under pressure, they regress to what they most usually know better. And in fact, what we do not expect, he says, I think more or less under life-threatening pressure, and I think this crisis today is like that, is we don't expect creativity. Although in the resilience, we want people to adapt and inject some creativity. And I think one of the good examples that I resonate with that is, for example, after one of the big hurricanes, again in US, I think was Hurricane Andrew, UPS, one of these major fast carrier, they were still able to deliver the packages in Florida to the people who were, devastated. They were not living anymore in their cars, but in their houses, but in their cars and so forth. So I think the creativity comes to what the people know at best. And I think I would argue that in air traffic management organizations, the air traffic control, they did at best what they knew they could do while being creative. They could still moving traffic in scalable up and down. So, but coming back at your definition, I think we should see them complementary. I think in resilience, you escalate it up at the level of a system, because what we try to decompose, we look at the safety, we look at the quality, we look at the efficiency, we look at the finance part. And I think in my understanding of the resilience, or call it systems thinking, that, or safety too, how we want to call it these days, you think exactly in system, and you're thinking as a whole, not as decomposing them and then try to make sense of only one of them, because then it is too much complexity today to deal like that, like in the past. So this is what
we should define a certain level of granularity at which we should be talking about resilience. We cannot talk about resilience then at the individual level or the team level. Is that correct?
No, I mean, also when you talk resilience in terms of capability to react of what? Of your normal incidents, which could be a test of how resilient you are, or events that you would think they were uncredible to happen, but you know about them, or to react to those that we called them earlier black swans or whatever. Yeah. So I think to me, it's in answering to all of them. It's not that we need to be able to those that we think were uncredible, or this we are never expecting, we're not enough thinking out of the box. So, but I would argue what is more important than to make that separation is to make it happen because we look after it, and it's not just because it's by luck. Because I think my other, parallel or metaphor or example like that is, for example, I don't know how many know that, but Morgan Stanley had more than 7,000 employees in the Twin Towers. So during the 9/11, but most of them, well, not most, all of them, they were located in the North Tower, which was hit after 15 minutes. And in fact, I think the first tower was hit at 8:46 in the morning. So at 8:47, the Morgan Stanley employees, led by their vice president security, they were evacuating the North Tower. And in fact, they lost only 7 people. And okay, their resilience was a bit made by luck because the first aircraft hit the South Tower. But the other part of the resilience were the training and rehearsal to evacuate. And they had another point of resilience, which they had several, redundancy centers, which if you look at until 10th of September or 8th of September of that year, they would probably perceive as an unnecessary expenditure. After the event, could have been genius, because they were looking at that. Mm-hmm. And I think to be resilient, I think it goes against the principle of the past years of management, because to be resilient, you need to be less efficient. So to have an amount of buffer, which allows you in the time of crisis to manage that. And again, I finish and I pass back to fellow colleagues. I think look at what happened after Fukushima. And one of the most affected companies in Japan during Fukushima was Toyota, because in their lean production, they have no slack. So once you cut every fat that you have and you are hit by an event, it's very difficult to adapt. So this is how I will say. So probably, some of them, accountants and the manager will not like it. But I think to be resilient, you need to be less efficient.
All righty. Thank you, Tony. Rowan, did you want to add something maybe?
Yeah, I was interested in this difference between safety and resilience. I think that a resilient system, by definition, should be safe. A safe system does not have to be resilient, because it can, and it sounds like heresy, it can just stop. And so I would see them as very overlapping concepts, but with a slightly different emphasis in terms of the goals. And so that's where I would see the key difference between the two.
Okay, all righty, thank you. So now let's maybe move on to the next topic of discussion, which is a really hot topic at the moment, about the CES2 proposal. So you've noticed that resilience has been used in this proposal, and it's been used within 2 contexts. One is about scalability of traffic to be able to accommodate rises and decreases in traffic. And the other side was resilience, financial resilience. So maybe I could ask Marc what do you think, what for you does it mean, this concept of resilience in terms of traffic volatility, basically?
Well, thank you. So the SCS2 plus recast proposal, which the Commission published on the 22nd of September, is interesting. It's a political initiative. It's something which has not been finished in 2013, and now it's being proposed again. What is much more interesting, I think, for at least for the professionals in the field, is this crisis. We have said now black swan. When you look from the reaction time, so the timing was a question. When you look from an operational point of view, and I think that this is really important also to maybe go into a bit of the details of this. From an operation point of view, the operations continued. Maybe sometimes was 90% or nearly 100% decrease of traffic, but the operation continued. Essential service, essential infrastructure, critical service, critical infrastructure, whatever you may call it. Where there is a black swan event, naturally, is on the economical field. You see most of their navigation service providers who have a route recovery system, so a route charge recovery system in place, they are basically cash strapped. They have no more money. So they need to find money outside from their treasury, and that means state aid, bank loans, form of credits, whatever. So and that is really a black swan event for the industry, in the sense, but it's an economical challenge. And I think what is most important now out of this crisis, and if the SCS2 plus recast can help there, is to say, okay, we need to secure the essential infrastructure. What is essential infrastructure of air traffic management? And we're going to pay for that. Whoever does pay for that, be it an entry fee for the airlines, so for the users, be it government aid, be it an infrastructure manager at European level, whatever. But this infrastructure needs to be secured. And then the variable part, the scalable part of the finances, this is something where maybe we need to discuss how we're going to finance it in the future. Is the route charging mechanism, so kilometer per ton flown, paid at a certain rate, is that something which can continue like this? But certainly, at least IFATCA has proposed some, so we call it a hybrid financial system in the future. And we hope that in the discussion, the political discussion, which are ongoing on CS2+, that these things will also float in as ideas, that you need to secure in any case the infrastructure before then you open up to certain financing system which might influence the survivability of the sector. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Marc. Let's move on to the next topic, because it's related about the future of ANS business models. And I would like to turn to Tom, because he has this brilliant paper he has co-written about the possible future ATM NSP models. So Tom, I would just like to ask you, in terms of resilience, you could talk about financial resilience maybe, which of the three proposals you made would be the most resilient?
That's a difficult question, because but I could say what I think has the most potential to get some support. I think that's a better way to put it, because it's a highly political question. This, as well as it is a question about what makes sense in the future. I'm sure if it should make sense in the future, I think the state financed model is for sure the easiest one and the best one for the industry as a whole, I think. But I think what has the best chances to come through is what we call the hybrid model, and Marc just talked about it. But before I say that, I agree a lot with Marc that these crises, if we go back and we take the 9/11, we take the financial crisis, we take the volcanic ashes, and now we have this COVID crisis. For ATM, for ATC and ATM, it's usually a financial problem. This is where we make where we introduce things that has a consequence for the resilience of the ATM system. I think we confuse it a little bit with the aviation business as a whole, because the airlines and the whole commercial side of what is going on is of course very important for us, but we always have enough time when these things happen. The traffic levels go down, and you could actually say that this is part of our resilience, because if we don't get these traffic levels down, then the mistakes we made from the last crisis have we cannot cope with the traffic levels we achieved. So you can see 2019 we made a lot of delay, and now we suddenly have a crisis again, and that gives us time to prepare for the next wave of traffic with high production pressure. And I think that David Woods asked a question there about the Icelandic the crisis up there. It's always for us financial problems afterwards, or financial pressure, and this financial pressure creates decisions that has an impact on what is going on the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that's where we get into trouble. I actually think we are quite good at responding to these crises, because we have Tony Licu and all the other people in Brussels sitting there thinking about what to do, coordinating responses. We have enough resources to do that. The whole Brussels go crazy when this happens, and then we have webinars every day. I mean, so we respond to this all the time, and this webinar is another response to this, and thinking about what to do in the future. I think that for ATM, it is the most important thing is the financial issue, and I would like to connect that. I see Roger Dillon has asked a question as well. What is the most important thing? I think that we need to connect these decisions to the resilience of the system somehow in the future. The business decisions we make today, tomorrow, and in the next couple of years are very important for the resilience of the ATM system in 5, 10, 15 years.
Okay. As we are still talking about the financial aspects of resilience, Anthony, shall we link the question? The other one on the financial side, yeah?
Yeah, there's a question from Paul Nearing, so I don't know whether one of the panelists would like to respond to it. We've touched upon it. Paul Nearing from IFATCA. In the opening, it was mentioned that ATM reacted more resilient than most industries. If we consider aviation partners in total, i.e. airlines, airports, ATM, aren't we talking about the appearance resilience? At least I hope I've interpreted that well, Paul. The total system was not resilient, at least on the financial side. Would anybody like to respond to that?
Let me try an attempt, at least from my side, also to build on what Tom was saying earlier. I would slightly disagree with that. Yes, it's a financial crisis, and as Marc and Tom said, this is where ATM, I think, because of the way how the model that we have for our collecting the route charges and live out of that. But even that, while I'm also a big fan of the hybrid model, I think even under the past model, there is some light there. I think the one who was not resilient and make this aviation perhaps to appear non-resilient is not aviation. I don't think the airlines have not reacted correctly. I don't think the airports they have not reacted correctly, but it's all the the political decision that has like the response today. I think is more, we are more afraid that as politicians, if we will be re-elected, what we will be seeing, well, how our decision it is. And it shows that we are not really a United States of Europe. Every country took a totally different decisions. One asking testing, one asking quarantine, one asking nothing, one allowing, intercontinental flights, others not allowing. I think in there, then of course the industry players are in difficulty. But before, let me be a bit politically incorrect, if I'm allowed, Tony and Milena.
Yes.
So before I joined EUROCONTROL, I worked in an air traffic control organization. Not too difficult to guess, knowing what is my nationality. And we're quite healthy as an organization at that. And I think most of navigation service providers are healthy. However, every now and then, whenever these organizations are healthy, because they are government owned, the government looks at the resources and says, you have saved 89 million euros. I will take them because I am your owner and I'll make use of this. I think we need to make, if one thing we need to take away for the financial part, we need to have respect to the provident funds. In the past years, I'm involved in trying to take some air traffic control organization outside from the civil servant into a semi-private organization. And one of the big elements of this negotiation that we had is to start building a provident fund. So this company, when it starts operating, they should be able, okay, not in day one, but in few years from the operations, they should have a year or two on which they can survive in time of crisis if there is no revenue. That is not building overnight. Maybe that should be the cash flow that the government gives at the establishment of this company, if we have to speak about the governance. And then in the coming back outside of the crisis, then this company can accumulate and make some savings to allow that to remove that pressure from the government. So.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the super interesting discussion. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so we will need to skip some slides. Also, for the participants, we would like to ask you if it would be okay with you to extend another 15 minutes, because it's a shame to end this discussion now. So yeah, we're going to move now on to the following section on the presentation, where we will try to kind of bridge the gap between theory and practice. So our four speakers are going to talk about research questions that they think could help achieving these goals. So yeah, would you like to start? Marc, maybe?
Yes, I would like to start. Okay, thank you. Very difficult to propose any research question, because I guess there are some researchers who know much more what their topic is. So basically for me, two things which can be looked into. Certainly the resilience definition of operation and financing, and the relationship in a crisis moment between the financial burden and the operational burden, if you wish. So that there is some sort of, we don't know how to handle a cash flow crisis. We don't know what should be done. Is it ideal to increase equity? Is it ideal to go to a bank? Is it ideal? All these things. So and what is the impact? And I think Tom also alluded to that. Whatever decision is being taken now, what kind of impact will that have on the future of safety, on the future of resilience? Because all the compliance work which we have seen in the past, all the compliance work ANSPs have done in order to bring up the safety management system, starting to look into safety cultural issues and so on and so forth, they have proven to work in the current situation. They have proven to work. So we can actually downsize and restart again, even if it's complex system, without major hiccups. We can even actually mimic the operations in the simulator, so we can continue to keep the people trained by going in the simulator and so on and so forth. So the system here is actually has proven to be resilient. But in particular, when you look at, as the question was from beforehand, the SES2+, if you start to reduce the fat, the slack, and Tony mentioned that as well, there is, of course, a risk that once you are then being challenged by a new crisis, that this resilience we have built up in being compliant with certain regulation, be it DATCA or EASA, that this is disappearing. So, in a nutshell, research resilience in the relation between financial crisis versus operation normality, and what kind of impact financial decisions will have on the future resilience system, or the resilience in the future system.
Okay, thank you, Marc. Tom, would you like to add something or propose a different research question?
I mean, of course, I like Marc's research question. I tried to put down a few things here that I, on paper, explore the relationship between ATM infrastructure, business models, and resilience. So if we explore that relationship somehow, I'm sure that there's a lot we can learn, because as Marc said, I think most of it has shown us that it holds up. Also, Rowan focused on some framework that we have for ATM. So I think between these things, there's something for resilience in there. Then I think we should consider to maybe, is there a difference between business and safety risk? I mean, we should also look at that. Are these to be combined? Because I think the way we have built our system right now, there's sometimes a big distance from the safety management system and the people who manage that and the business models. So bridging that gap is also a part that needs to be explored. Then and then in general, how does these decisions influence our ability to respond, and how do we monitor them? Because monitoring something over 10, 15 years is always difficult, and maybe somebody has good ideas for that, and maybe the research is already there. And how do we recognize the factors? So there are some questions there that can be asked for sure.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you, Tom. Rowan, would you like to tell us about your research questions you have in mind?
Sure. So I'm quite fascinated by the differences in the way different organizations, different domains, different industries have responded to the crisis, and what the drivers are behind those differences, how resilient those organizations are, what the organizational culture is behind it. Is there a difference between new versus established industries, for example? Because I think we've seen quite massive differences in the way organizations have responded. Some of that is also to do with underlying factors, such as how they've been supported by their national authorities or financially by the member states. But it would be really interesting to try and unpick those factors and learn more about them, I think. I also think that certainly throughout the past 6 months or so, what I've seen is that the nature of my work has changed in emphasis, but not completely in terms of the things that I do. And so I'm quite interested in particular with monitoring and learning and gathering data on safety situations, how we ensure that what we did is captured. So things like encouraging organizations to talk to people more, to gather qualitative information more. I know there's a lot of work out there already about that, but how you put that together and persuade people who are usually engineers, usually very numbers based, that this is a very valuable and very accurate way of working and understanding your risks, I think is really important. We've really benefited from it in the last 6 months, and so I don't want that to be lost.
Okay, thank you, Rowan. And Tony, it's your turn now.
Yes, thank you, Milena. Just unmuting myself. Yeah, I think there are some people in the audience like Professor Woods and Ricardo Patriarca that probably have better ideas than us. Actually, we get inspiration from them. And again, I got a lot of inspiration this year from David. And in fact, if we can translate their ideas in practice, I think that would be amazing. For research, I would suggest, and again, inspired by David, it's, measuring, how do we really measuring the resilience of the organization? What indicators, what, how do we measure this? Like, I think David call it stress edges, stretching. How do we measure in real? How do we apply these edges and stretching? I think, and one probably, which is one that I would like to see it myself, because I would translate the resilience thinking of crisis in daily operations. I see how much we work better together as an organization in a time of crisis, or not necessarily in a time of crisis. If I'm allowed, for example, in 2018 in April, we had this outage of the DNM, quite big, known by everyone. And I think you have used it in one of the resilience events. And immediately that was followed by a big unscheduled EASA audit on site and so forth. And the fact that how the company and came together and worked together to do these fixes, answer to the EASA and so forth. So I would love to see, I know you'll put this in the wild, but and it's not for the years of Rowan probably. I would like to see ourselves working in my organization with the same enthusiasm when we have the pressure of an EASA coming on site or an ISO audit coming on site or working in the aftermath of an event where the problem is most of the organization, I'll challenge that, we are not learning, we are just fixing. Because today it's everything about efficiency, about cutting costs, about reducing delays and reducing the budgets and so forth, sending less FTEs, and so forth. And there is every time there is an event, call it crisis, call it a small incident, there is a big pressure to go and come up with the fix. How do we fix that? And then after it's passing, we are navigating in an ocean of relaxation that it's unacceptable. And I would like to see how do I make an organization think like thinking like in crisis but in normal operation. And then I think then we will keep the level of resilience up. So this will be just few ideas. And using, the magician Ricardo that can do amazing stuff with technology. I think technology, it will be different. And indeed, we can move, making use of the technology and digitalization and, machine learning and artificial intelligence in putting together all these sources of safety information, safety intelligence. And I think which probably we can't do it if we just sit in a panel and we just discuss. We need the machines to tell us, and then of course the subject matter experts to decide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So all these questions and the ones you've mentioned in the Q&A box, we will try to answer, and we will try to cluster these questions and organize a follow-up webinar, which is already scheduled for the 11th of February 2021. And there we will bring researchers which are going to try to at least give directions for all of these research questions. Because this is like a Pandora's box, and what we try to do today is just to crack it open, but there will be an awful lot of work coming out of this. So we will keep you informed about the follow-up webinar. But now we have only a couple of more minutes left. Maybe we should answer a couple of more questions before we close. Anthony?
Okay. There are a number of questions here. So Dave has got a couple. Dave, let me know which one you want answered, and I'll ask another one first. Roger Dillon, soon to be late of Nats Dillon, asks, when the pandemic is over, what are the most important lessons the panel think ANSPs should learn? So Tom, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can try. Yeah, I mean, the line of my presentation has, of course, been on business models and how they hold up in this situation. And I think we should actually reflect about, we have spent a lot of time in Europe making ANSPs into a business or some kind of competition or whatever, but we need to discuss our relationship with the state, with ICAO, with EASA, and how we actually keep the system resilient, and why we have all these cumbersome rules and regulations in place that we tend to, or that we have spent time on trying to change. But when we have had this severe change in ways, in traffic patterns and a lot less traffic, these mechanisms, and even back to the Chicago Convention from 1944, some of this has turned out to be very valuable. And I think that discussion between ANSPs, states, and in Europe, the EU system, and then ICAO needs to be reflected upon, and learn what this actually means and why we have put this in place. So then I think we can get we can be stronger to the next crisis, but because I'm sure it will come, the next one.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom. Marc, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting question. I don't know if we can learn anything because it's too early. Because one of the biggest risks, and that's more from a risk perspective, I would like to answer this question. Tony showed in the beginning the slide of the difference in appreciation, difference of scope of this crisis between the operational world in ANSPs, because there are other sector of the industry like the airlines, which is completely a different picture. But for the ANSPs, the difference between an operation which is reduced but which functions normally and some challenges with regard to license are there, but they are to be overcome. And an absolute crisis, no more money, no more financial stability, survivability, downscaling of huge part of company. What kind of drift will that create? What kind of an iceberg are we breaking loose because we are now inside of a company where one part of the company struggles 100 to 200% working days to actually guarantee the survival, long-term survival of the company. On the other side, we have the operations which continue to work, but half of the staff is in furlough. So is actually on short-term work, most time paid by taxpayers. So this will create a drift. And I think that for me is the biggest risk. And if we can be flagged out and looked into, and also looked into with maybe some social tools, so psychological tools to overcome this gap, which will have at down the road, it will have an impact as well on the resilience capability of the company.
Thank you very much, Jude. That's quite intriguing. Tony.
Here I'm totally with Marc. I think we should not rush into drawing lessons learned immediately. I think this pandemic, we will still feel its tail for many more months, hopefully not years to come. Because if the vaccine, even if successful, I was reading the other day, UK is prepared to vaccinate 1 million people a week, which means at 70 million, okay, maybe they will not be all vaccinated. It needs a year and a half. So I think what we need to take a step back and wait and learn the real lessons. I mean, we need to see I hope Roger will stay in the industry after his departure in NASA. He will not be forgiven if he disappears. So at the end of this month. So and what I see was let's summarize. I think a chap, he was Hungarian origin, Andy Grove. He said the great companies are improved by the crisis. The bad companies are destroyed, and just the good ones probably they survive. And I think we would need to see which companies have been destroyed, which company have survived, and which company have thrived. And then we will know probably what guys they did well comparing with us. Because we might just by furloughing and getting rid of the senior people, I don't think in the rush that we are doing now, we have the proper succession planning. And it will take years until we will come back at the knowledge that we have. And I'm not necessarily saying, we know the capabilities, is the knowledge that we have not passed it to the generation that is to come after. So, and this is where that's more things that they don't let me sleep at night.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Unfortunately, we are out of time now, and we need to close the session today. We have so much interesting discussion going on, and again, we haven't managed to really answer all the questions you raised, but we're committed to do it in a written form, and we'll post it on the REA website. We can send it to you by email as well. And this discussion will only continue in the next webinar in February 2021. So I would like to thank our speakers for joining us today. It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for all your time and great ideas. And within the Resilience Engineering Association, we will really try to do our best to put them into practice and hopefully show some results to you already in February. So thank you once again to you all, and thank you for the participants, and sorry for exceeding the timeline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you both. Very interesting.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
And Milena, well done.
Thank you. It was really great. I'm
thank you.
really sorry about the nightmare.
Well, it wasn't
No
a
worries.
nightmare. We
Let's
adapted.
try to debrief if you want after.
Yes, what happened at the beginning? Yeah, I couldn't believe when I saw the
His
blue
work has
screen.
done. We have tested, rehearsed it, and when it had to, it didn't work. But you
Yes.
came back, so you are resilient.
Yeah. But was it quick enough?
Yeah, no, Tony jumped in, Anthony jumped in, so took over. And yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it
Be
was
well,
really,
be
really
safe.
interesting. Mhm.
Okay. All the best. Ciao,
Thanks,
ciao.
Tony.
Guys, thank you for joining.
Bye.
You can stop the recording.
Bye-bye.
Yep, okay.